In 2006, voters roundly rejected a $2.3 billion proposal for universal pre-K promoted by Rob Reiner. In 2010, however, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger opened the door to state-funded pre-K programs by establishing a new grade level, transitional kindergarten, for children who turn 5 between September 2nd and December 2nd. That program, however, covers only 25% of the potential pre-K population. As a result, Senate Leader Darrell Steinberg has called for the adoption of universal pre-K for all and has declared it to be this year's #1 legislative priority. Is such a program worth the costs? We'll ask. Molly Tafoya with Early Edge California, a preschool advocacy group who are the key backers of the current universal pre-K proposal, and Lillian Mongeau, a reporter for EdSource, a well-respected publication covering K-12 education in California. Universal pre-K, something that California can afford, or is it something that California can't afford to do without?
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from Paramount Agricultural Companies, growing healthy food for you and your family.
From the California Channel at the state capitol, Valley PBS, and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. Today we're coming to you from the state capitol, where the biggest issue on the legislative agenda is whether or not to adopt the universal pre-K program for all Californians. Our guest is Lillian Mongeau with EdSource. It's a go-to place for news on education. She's written extensively on pre-K programs generally and the one being considered by the California Legislature in particular. So welcome to the Maddy Report, Lillian.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first let's start with what's already out there. The feds have a program, the federal government has a program called Head Start. What is that?
So Head Start is a child care and education program run by the federal government. The money that goes to state programs goes directly to the person who's running the program or the center that's running the program. It doesn't funnel through the state. But in California, about 100,000 children are served by Head Start, and almost twice that number are eligible. And there's not enough funding to serve all of them.
So that's why they're not getting covered, because you simply don't have the funding.
That's part of it.
Okay, so the state also offers some pre-K programs already. What are they and what do they do?
So this is pretty complicated. The state offers a couple different kinds of pre-K programs. One of them is called state preschool, and that is for children from families who are about at 2 times the federal poverty level. And those children are eligible for a half day of care. Sometimes there's a fee associated with it that the families pay, and those are set up almost always at schools. So a school will have a program. The other kind of care that the state administers is child care, and families get basically vouchers, and they can go to various child care centers that meet certain regulations and have their child get care there, but it's paid for through the state through a voucher system.
There's also something called transitional kindergarten that was adopted in 2010. What's that?
That's right. So transitional kindergarten is it's best to just start at the beginning with transitional kindergarten. So there was a push to change the acceptance date for kindergarten. So they wanted to have kids be 5 before they started kindergarten, whereas previous to this, you could turn 5 by December and you were still eligible. So kindergarten teacher was saying, this isn't working, the kids in our classrooms are too young, so they pushed to change that date to September 1st.
By the way, that affected my child, but anyway.
Sorry. So what they did to make sure that children whose parents thought they were going to get to go to kindergarten still had somewhere to go is they started transitional kindergarten, and that was a year for the kids falling between those 2 dates, September 1st and December 1st, the old deadline. And they rolled it in 1 month at a time so that those kids could attend transitional kindergarten. Now, the president of the Senate, Darrell Steinberg, is suggesting, as well as many of his colleagues, is suggesting that that program be open to all children who turn 4 by September 1st.
Okay, we'll talk more about that in a moment. So the state has current programs for pre-K. About how much do they cost?
Well, there's a lot of different funding streams, but all together they spend about $607 million annually on preschool programs, and it doesn't include TK costs.
Okay, so basic question, I guess, do these programs work?
That's a great question. Does preschool work? The much broader question. There's a lot of research showing that good preschool programs really make a difference for kids. They get them ready for kindergarten, and there's a lot that show long-term gains, like children who go to preschool are less likely to get pregnant when they're teenagers. They're less likely to drop out of high school. But there's also a lot of variation in quality across programs, and whether or not California's preschool program is working. There's not as much data on that as some people would like to see. There's been some initial studies saying, yes, it does a pretty good job. The trick with preschool is you really need to track the kids from the time they start preschool through to when they're like 30 or 40 years old.
So a longitudinal study that, got to look at someone for 18, 20 years.
That's right, and that's very hard to do. And of course, by the time the kids are 30 or 40 years old, the program is quite old itself, the program that happened. So, for instance, there was this preschool program called Perry Preschool Program in Michigan. They tracked the kids through to being 40. They're saying these kids just outperformed their peers like crazy. Like, we definitely should do this. But one of the complaints is like, yeah, but that program's from 30 years ago, and it was addressing all these problems that aren't problems now, where there's bigger problems. And so it's really difficult for people to come down on that. Most people in the research community would tell you it works.
So if there's an appropriation for this, it would seem that the legislature also has an oversight function. So is anybody looking or thinking about tracking, doing these studies, these longitudinal studies, to see if any of this stuff works?
Yes, Steinberg has written that into the bill of transitional kindergarten. One of the complaints about things, especially in California, like movements to make changes, like, for instance, making class sizes smaller, is people say it wasn't studied very well. We didn't have a good sense of like how it was different for the kids who had smaller class sizes versus the kids who didn't.
Which I always wonder, they pick a number, 23 kids or 24 kids, and why is that the magic number for class size? But
well, yeah, we could get into class size. I've heard it's 15, so we were never going to go to 15, and we're not going to do that now.
Right.
Definitely with younger kids, though, class size is an issue, and one of the things that people are talking about is what is an appropriate teacher to student ratio in this transitional kindergarten program. And right now, the Senate has proposed that it's 20 to 1 for one teacher, but that they will also have an assistant in the classroom, and that will lower the ratio.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to discuss what makes a quality pre-K program. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with Lillian Mongeau with EdSource, who's written extensively about pre-K programs. So what are the key elements of a quality pre-K program?
That's a great question. So the key elements of a quality program, and you can go to EdSource and find a whole article we did about this for how parents can pick a program. But the main thing is the quality of the teacher, the safety of the classroom, but also the I don't know exactly how to describe it, the things that are in the classroom and the way that they're set up. There's been a lot of research done on the best way for a preschool classroom to be set up. So, for example, tables should be low, preschool size. There should be those little chairs that you can't really fit in anymore. As an adult, those need to be there so that kids can access materials in a way that's comfortable for them. They also, bookshelves need to be around. They usually have very low bookshelves sort of around the room with all the toys that are available to kids, accessible to kids right away. Of course, you want things like paint, however, up high and in a cabinet that the kids can't get to.
Any parent knows that.
Right, exactly. So there's things like that. One teacher told me, researcher at Stanford told me one of the best things to look for is check the art on the walls. The art should be, you can tell, of course, the kids, okay, now we're doing a blue project, right? So they're all kind of blue, but they should be pretty different. If you look on the wall and it's like matching Santa Clauses and they're all cut out from exactly the same pattern, that's not a good sign.
It's interesting, we just had open house at my child's school, and I wish I had known this before, but anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so that you want to have an environment where the kids are comfortable, where they can access materials by themselves, but also where they're encouraged to be creative within some sort of structure.
Okay, what do the critics and supporters say generally about pre-K programs? There's actually seems to be a little bit of a split of opinion on this.
There's a little bit of a split. I mean, it's one of those splits where it's probably more like 80-20 than 50-50. I would say almost every researcher you talk to says, look, the research has proved this worked. We're still kind of figuring out the best way to do it. We're certainly figuring out the best way to do it on a broad scale, right? There's really no question for small programs. People say, oh, it should be this, this, and this. Affording that on a large scale for every student is sort of a different thing, and that there's not as much research on.
There's a Nobel laureate, James Heckman,
Yes.
that indicates that that's a pretty good deal, and we'll talk about that in a second. But there was also this Head Start impact study that they did, and a lot of times you hear conservatives, kind of cite this. They said, listen, there's no demonstrable impact on academic performance as a result of Head Start. What about that? What about that study?
Well, a couple things. One, after that study, Head Start put in a lot more quality standards that they've been working on since the study came out. And they said, look, we found some real problems and we're trying to fix them. So whether or not they'll be successful at that remains to be seen, but they're trying. Another thing that's important about that study is it ended at 3rd grade, and a lot of the critics of the study who are saying, yes, okay, it faded out. But if you look at that Perry preschool project I was talking about, when you look at how they were doing in 3rd to 5th grade, those kids weren't doing that much better than their peers then either. But then, 30 years down the line from that, they were graduating from high school, they weren't going to prison, they weren't on welfare. So there are all these other gains that you couldn't tell by their 3rd grade test scores.
Could they tell what that was attributable to?
They're still sort of figuring that out. I mean, they say there's a lot of theories. It's because you get better self-control regulation, when you learn to share, you learn all these basic things. A big thing that kids before the age of 5 are working on is vocabulary and communication. And so the more words you hear and the more times you're read to and the more times you get to imagine what the book might mean, even if you don't know the words, those are all things that build a child's both vocabulary but also communication abilities. And the better communication abilities we have, we know the better you do later on.
I think I had read something about a Stanford researcher that indicated that students if they're low-income students, are well behind other students by the time they reach kindergarten.
There was a recent study by a Stanford researcher. It was actually confirming research that was originally done in 1995. There's a 30 million word gap between what a 3-year-old from a middle or high-income family knows and what a 3-year-old from a low-income family knows in terms of vocabulary.
So are pre-K programs cost-effective? What's the return on investment?
Well, the studies have come back with everything from 2 to 1, $2 to 1 invested to, I've seen as high as 16 to 1. A lot of people are skeptical of those super high numbers, but I haven't heard of or seen any studies that say, oh no, it's a loss. There's less than the $1 you put in the end. So the question of how much of a return on investment is open. James Heckman says it's 7. And that's something, again, that people are still trying to figure out.
$7 to 1 is a 600% return on investment.
Right. That's right.
That's pretty high.
That's right. So the people who have looked at that research and believe it, and that's a lot of people, including a lot of businessmen. There was a businessman testifying before the Senate hearing yesterday. The U.S. Senate was having a hearing on this because there's a federal bill in the works. And this was the former Procter & Gamble CEO, and he said, look, given what I know, there's no way I wouldn't make this investment as a businessman because, there doesn't appear to be any downside.
It's interesting because the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has come out in support of pre-K too. So,
yeah.
But there's still, I guess, some debate out there by a few people. But we'll see how that goes. But let me ask you one last question. That is, do all children benefit equally with pre-K, or do disadvantaged kids benefit more?
It's pretty clear that disadvantaged kids benefit more, but that's partly because these are the kids we're talking about who have a 30 million word gap. So if they can be in an environment where they are hearing more words and potentially where their parents are getting some practice doing the same thing with them at home from the teachers at the preschool, that helps them immensely. At the same time, middle class parents there's 2 working parents, those parents need somewhere for their kids to go during the day too. So the question of whether or not they benefit is a little bit weird. Of course, they need to be somewhere. I think the other thing that you bring up, though, is in terms of critics, one of the criticisms of the TK program being suggested here in California is that it would be universal. And a lot of the critics say this really should just focus on the kids who need it most. This is, not something that should be widely applied. We're not sure it works as well as everybody says, and we should be more cautious with public dollars.
Okay, well, I want to thank Lillian Mongeau from EdSource, a great place to go for information on education in California, for joining us. Up next, what would the pre-K proposal look like that's being considered by the California Legislature? We'll hear from one of the key supporters of that legislation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. Our next guest is Molly Tafoya with Early Edge California, a preschool advocacy group and a key supporter of the current pre-K legislation in front of the California Legislature. So welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you.
So why should the legislature have pre-K, universal pre-K at the top of the legislative agenda? Some would argue there's lots of other pressing issues.
Absolutely. Early learning has been proven to be a key part of ensuring a child's lifelong success, not only in school, but in career and beyond. There is a ton of research out there that shows that children who receive high-quality early learning experiences go on to excel in kindergarten and beyond. Not only are they receiving the academic skills that set them on that path, but they're also receiving the social-emotional skills that help contribute to a thriving student and a thriving employee in the future. And so, you know, we really see that early learning is crucial for kids, it's crucial for their families, and it's crucial for communities who want a stable workforce and a well-educated community.
It's kind of an ounce of prevention
Absolutely.
is worth a pound of cure kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Well, why do we need this program? I mean, we've got a federal program called Head Start. Why do we need universal pre-K in California?
Head Start's a great program. We love Head Start. As you mentioned, it is federally funded. The problem is, and this is a problem here in California, is that Head Start doesn't serve all of the eligible children. We've got half of preschool age children receive programs like the California State Preschool Program or Head Start, and these are low-income kids, so these are the kids who need it most, and only half of them receive those crucial services. So we're falling short in serving those children. When we look at transitional kindergarten, on the other hand, which serves a quarter of children and it's not income-based, we're only looking at a quarter of 4-year-olds who are receiving high-quality early learning. So we really have a lot of ground to make up here.
And that transitional kindergarten is only covering a quarter of 4-year-olds or pre-kindergarten folks. Why?
Sure.
Well, why is it only covering that group?
It's a good question. So transitional kindergarten was created in 2010 when the kindergarten entry date was moved up. So prior to this, California had one of the latest kindergarten entry dates in the country. Kids who turned 5 before December 2nd, I believe, were eligible for kindergarten. And so for those young 5-year-olds or 4-year-olds when they started, kindergarten was too rigorous. It wasn't developmentally appropriate. So 2010, the Kindergarten Readiness Act was passed, moving the start date up to September 2nd. So kids born before then could enter kindergarten, leaving behind a quarter of those children born in the fall who no longer had access. So TK, transitional kindergarten, was created. Yeah,
it was actually also, it was a situation where it was a money-saving device as well. So it happened with the science and the money both kind of worked together. You know, so the legislature is considering now universal pre-K.
Yes.
What are the elements of the current proposal in front of the legislature?
So SB 837 is the bill. The proposal would expand transitional kindergarten to serve all 4-year-olds. So not only would it expand access, it would also improve quality standards. One of the things that we know is that high quality pre-K involves lower class sizes, better teacher-to-child ratios, and higher qualifications for teachers. That's what this bill does. It lowers the class size ratio and increases qualifications for teachers.
But it's not the same as what President Obama is arguing in terms of quote-unquote universal pre-K. His program really is not universal, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's his proposal would offer pre-K for all low-income children.
I think it's 200% of the poverty level.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So what would be the cost of this proposal, and can the state afford it?
So the cost of the proposal as it currently stands is about $1.4 billion, and it would expand access to all 4-year-olds who would now be included under Prop 98 funding, so the education funding formula. What's great about this is that pre-K programs to date have been vulnerable to cuts. Since 2008, we've suffered $1 billion in cuts. By including pre-K, this transitional kindergarten, under Prop 98, the funding would be safer and would be sort of valued on par with K through 12. And we see this as a crucial part of the education pipeline. Frankly, we can't afford not to do it.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, you were mentioning earlier about the quality of the program is dependent on things like teachers' credentials, teacher pay, maybe even class size, things of that nature. So the bottom line is a quality pre-K is going to cost money.
Yes.
The question is, would this legislative proposal provide sufficient funds to create a quality pre-K program?
Absolutely. So the current California State Preschool Program allocates about $3,400, give or take, per child, $3,400 a year per child. Under this proposal, each child would receive, under the average daily attendance, I know I'm getting a little wonky here, but would receive $6,300 per child. So that covers that higher quality standard. It covers lower class sizes and includes options for professional development for teachers to teach this younger grade.
Okay, well, up next, what are the prospects for universal pre-K? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with Tafoya of Early Edge California about the possibilities of universal pre-K in California. So, this has been tried before and failed. In 2006, the voters rejected universal pre-K in Prop 82. It was pushed by Rob Reiner, people might remember. So why do you think this attempt is going to pass when the previous attempt didn't?
We've learned a lot since 2006, and frankly, a lot of the circumstances are different. We have a lot more brain research that shows why early learning matters, and we have a lot of national momentum on our side. We've got a president who's made this a priority in his State of the Union, and we've got the political will here in California. I think things are a lot different. We also have national polling that shows a majority of Americans, Democrat and Republicans, support this.
It's interesting. I think when my research, I found the cost of Prop 82, the original prop back in 2006, was $2.3 billion a year. This one's quite a bit less. It's about $1 billion a year, so it's a different number. Well, Governor Brown is not jumping on board, at least yet, in terms of support of universal pre-K. What makes you think he'll end up supporting it?
We are having conversations with the legislature, with the administration about early learning and its importance, and we know that with the leadership of Pro Tem Steinberg and Senator Carol Liu, as well as the Assembly, we've got a lot of political will here. We've got a lot of not only political will, but popular support for this. We're excited to work with the governor to get this included in his budget.
I was also doing some research that showed that 30 states and the District of Columbia have actually increased appropriations to universal pre-K at about 6.9%, so significant. It seems in other areas it seems to be attractive. What about attracting Republican support for universal pre-K? Maybe something like a voucher program?
This is not a partisan issue. As you mentioned, 30 states have pre-K programs. Universal pre-K programs exist in states like Georgia and Oklahoma with Republican governors. It's not a partisan issue. What we're looking at is education for our children, and that's hard to argue with, frankly.
The congressional Republicans are proposing $7,000 for a child care and development block grant. What about that instead of universal pre-K?
To get back to your question about the vouchers, here in California, we do have the voucher program. Unfortunately, there are no quality standards for vouchers. There are no quality standards, neither health and safety standards. So what we're talking about is investing in a program that we know will work.
We talked before about low-income kids, ESL kids. They've been the focus of new funding under this local control funding formula. Yeah. So let's talk first about, is universal pre-K good for all children, or is it good for lower income kids more specifically? Should we be targeting our money toward lower income?
You're absolutely right. There is research that shows tremendous outcomes for low-income children. The local control funding formula is rooted in that research base. But what we're looking at is a universal program that we know will benefit all kids. We don't say, all right, third graders, let's do an income-based test. That's not how public education works. It's a right, and so we want to make sure that everybody has access to it.
What about a subsidy, maybe a sliding scale where we'd pay more for universal pre-K, for pre-K for low-income people and maybe less for high-income people?
You mentioned the local control funding formula. If we could guarantee that every district would use the local control funding formula dollars to create an early learning program in their district to serve 4-year-olds, great. That would be tremendous. But unfortunately, we don't have that guarantee and we don't have that option. And so we want to create a program, or we want to build on the existing structure of the transitional kindergarten program, increase standards, increase quality, and increase access. And that's what we're looking to do here with this proposal.
Yeah, I know that Fresno Unified School District, for example, is putting a lot of money and effort into universal pre-K, but we were talking about this local control funding formula. Wouldn't districts, if they see, based on research, a high rate of return on pre-K, wouldn't they just take particularly that extra money, that supplemental money they're getting in a local control funding formula, and focus on classes, particularly for English learners and low-income students, creating a pre-K program for them? Wouldn't that make sense because it's a high rate of return?
That would be great. We would love to see that, and we're interested in working with districts on expanding access to low-income children and those English language learners anyway. What we would like to do is kind of institutionalize that, make sure that these children, starting with the kids who need it most, have access to a program, and we can do that by including TK in Prop 98.
I'd like to thank Lillian Mongeau from EdSource and Molly Tafoya from Early Edge, California for joining us. If you want to stay up to date on state and local politics, you can sign up for our free and award-winning e-newsletter, The Maddy Daily, by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. And now, another perspective.
Hi, I'm Kendra Rogers, Executive Director at First 5 Fresno County. As Frederick Douglass said, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And we know that investment in high-quality preschool is just the way for us to help build strong children throughout our state. However, we know that there are still over half of the children throughout our communities that do not have access to high-quality preschool, even though we know that their brains develop most dramatically during that time. We are encouraging our community to come together to invest in high-quality preschool, as the research shows that this is one of the surest ways we can ensure that children are ready to succeed in life, in their careers, and we know that this is the way to help build our community to a strong, economically vibrant place. Investments in high-quality early learning are really what starts to make the difference in the educational path for young children. So we come together with our partners to really push forward and promote the concept of investing early in our human capital, starting at birth, and that is exactly what high-quality preschool does. For the Maddy Report, I'm Kendra Rogers.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the Maddy Institute, the California Channel, Casey, or Valley PBS. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions shared in the Maddy Report, visit our website at valleypbs.org/Maddy. This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.